what would you advise our listeners to be wary of, if I could use that word? Because there are a lot of things that look a certain way and promise a whole lot, but actually don't deliver. And we're not here to diss anyone, but I am wondering if you could share some of your thoughts and how to navigate that territory wisely. Kathleen?
Sure. Um, I believe that it is so critical for anybody who has made a decision that they want to transition or that they are in that place where they are going to transition, that it really begins with having clarity about, taking stock of who they are. We've talked about proposition and the importance of that. And then it's today, 3%, we've talked about that. Targeted, deliberate, relationship-focused approach is going to net a far greater return than any service provider who is going to offer to distribute your resume to umpteen search consultants, private equity firms, or others, where, quite frankly, there is, unless a firm asks, and usually when they ask, they are willing to, pay a certain fee for that. But if it's just a question of being distributed, there's no real guarantee that they have anything or that they want to talk to you. And that is an experience that I hear over and over and over again. So by being deliberate and targeted and learning how, it's kind of like we can either teach you to fish or we can fish for you. And I think learning how to fish, learning how to do this today is so critical. Mhm.
Sandra?
So remember I said in the '08 recession, I was surprised that a lot of executives didn't know how to do this. Um, I was also starting to see the trend that needing to use an executive search firm to find an executive was going away. That's only increased over time, meaning that's only, the decreased, I guess. So, even the firm I used to be with, they sold their retained business and then they sold out to a staffing. Um, so a lot of recruiters, they were like, well, how am I going to make money? What is my asset then? Well, I have all these contacts and I have people's email addresses and I can sort of take people, and we called it then reverse marketing. And what I saw is that that doesn't work
Right.
because that agent model at the executive level is, I guess you can call it, once you're at a certain level, it's sort of, unless they've hired the agent to go out and find the person, an agent marketing you in is sort of cringe, I guess you could say. Um, and the last thing you want to do is just end up in somebody's inbox with some generic message that could probably match to anybody else, unsolicited. Like that puts you in a bad light. So what did I do? I started blogging about it. And I started saying why you never pay for services like that. So imagine my surprise when ExecuNet reaches out to me, a service for executives. And I was like, well, I blog about that, right? You can't guarantee you're going to find somebody a job. That is a falsehood because there are less positions than there are people. And we're not in the interview with you. So it is a falsehood. And I've seen what happens now that I've been at ExecuNet because we talk to these people all the time. Oh, I spent this money, whether it be 16 or $20,000, and they guaranteed I find a job. And then when I didn't, they just pulled it out of the fine print. Oh, well, you were supposed to respond to eight roles a day online and you didn't. There aren't 8 roles a day to respond to for most executives in a month. And so when ExecuNet reached out to me, I was like, I say that, right? And they said, yeah, but we agree with you because the only thing that works, and this is the strategy, is figuring out what your value proposition is. And most people can't do that on their own. I haven't actually run into anybody that could, because, yeah, you sure might have an understanding of your highest and best use case, but where that intersects with your competitive differentiation, you need somebody that's worked with hundreds of other people like yourself to know what that differentiation positioning is. Why does it have to be differentiated from everybody else? Or at least your most competitive space, because since there's less positions than there are people going for them, you have to be competitive when you make a quarter to a half million or more a year. So first we figure out what that is, and that's what our coaches do. That's what specifically probably 80% of our coaches are dedicated to doing. And then you have to figure out how to get that message communicated to the right people and the right place at the right time. Well, to do that, you also have to know the audience that you're communicating to, what they're looking for, what they need. And then to Kathleen's point, you have to be able to talk about it, because the person that says, I'm going to find you a job, isn't with you when you go out to dinner with your wife and your wife runs into a work colleague, because this is a true landing story. And then the work colleague's husband, you're talking to him just randomly in the right place at the right time, happens to be a CEO of a company, which fortunately was somebody that we had coached on the value proposition because he didn't do it the wrong way. He did it the right way. 3 months later, the guy made a position for him. So those types of scenarios where people actually do get a job from, that person isn't going to be there with you. That's to Kathleen's point. Teach you how to fish, because unless you can do that on your own, unless you can do that when you get that role where you have new stakeholders, where you need to keep branding yourself because this is probably going to happen again in two years, and unless this is going to be your last run at it, it's not going to be a lasting investment. And all you're going to do is make yourself look kind of weird to your network.
Right. So being positioned properly, being prepared. And, I think the other thing that kind of puts a bow on this is the congruency that's required today. And I can speak to this, having interviewed thousands, and I mean thousands of people where, the research team that I would have, I would see, okay, we're building a slate, a CFO slate here, and there are 19 criteria, and as we well know, we're going to hit 18 of those 19, and most are on spec, might be over, under, but the point is that I would then have the opportunity to have these conversations. And they did a fine job of researching, but then what would happen is I'd get in a conversation and it would be like this. The person I was talking to wasn't the person portrayed on paper. And I knew in that moment that this was not somebody, because I knew my client, I knew their success profile, I knew what they, what kinds of other things they were looking for, that it's like, what is being communicated verbally does not align with what is on the collateral, and it doesn't align with what is out online. So unless we have that congruency and it is locked down and airtight, search consultants today and others are not going to take the time to say necessarily, you know what, you need to do a better job of telling your value story. You need to really crystallize that. They just keep moving.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's because of risk mitigation. They don't want to open themselves up to that kind of feedback, in giving you that feedback. And other times they just knew, because again, that competitive and comparative differentiation is so fierce and it's so critical. And that's why positioning and preparation are investments that professionals and executives need to make, and they're non-negotiable.